Good morning, and welcome to the special program co-sponsored by Beth David Synagogue, Hadar, and the Jewish Federation of Greater Hartford. I first had the privilege of meeting Rabbi Yitz Greenberg in 1978, the first year of my career, and I have considered him to be a mentor ever since. I was most recently inspired by a series of video clips he produced on the concept of Tzelem Elokim, the belief that every human being is endowed with a spark of the divine. Recognizing the spiritual capacity of every human life is a sacred value that guides Beth David Synagogue. If orthodoxy can be defined as a spiritual system based upon timeless and sacred truths, then I believe in and teach a Judaism that embraces the infinite value of and respect due to humanity's covenantal aspirations and capacities. This morning, I invite you to imagine with me beyond the singular Tzelem Elokim that lives within each of us. Imagine a community guided by this principle in all that it does. If this seems unreal, simply reflect on the words of Theodore Herzl, Im Tirtzu, Ein Zo Agada, which this morning I choose to translate as, if we will it, it can be our reality. This morning, we are all privileged to study with Rabbi Greenberg as he comments on a few of the selected videos. Thank you all for being with us today. I now hand our program over to Galia Greenberg.
Boker Tov, Bruchim Habaim, good morning and welcome. Rabbi Irving Yitz Greenberg serves as the president of the JJGI Greenberg Institute for the Advancement of Jewish Life and as senior scholar in residence at Hadar in New York City. Rabbi Greenberg was ordained by Beth Joseph Rabbinical Seminary of Brooklyn, New York, and earned a PhD in history from Harvard University. Together with Elie Wiesel, Zichrono Livracha, he founded CLAL, the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership, and served as its president until 1997. From 1997 to 2008, he served as founding president of Jewish Life Network, Steinhardt Foundation, which was instrumental in the creation of many important Jewish endeavors, including Birthright Israel and the Partnership for Excellence in Jewish Education. He is a leading Jewish thinker and has written extensively on post-Holocaust Jewish religious thought, Jewish-Christian relations, pluralism, and the ethics of Jewish power. In his forthcoming new book, The Triumph of Life, he argues that the Holocaust and the Jewish assumption of power in creating the State of Israel are the beginning of a new era. I'm pleased to introduce Ben Adler, who will be the moderator for today's program.
Thank you, Galia. One of my first managers in the business world explained that every meeting is either a strategic meeting or a tactical meeting. That is big picture or details. And I think we'll all agree that this is one of those sort of big picture conversations. We're excited for this opportunity to speak with Rabbi Greenberg. Our format today will be one where we show a video, then we post a poll, and you'll be able to interact with the poll. And then we'll have a conversation with Rabbi Greenberg. There'll be chance for Q&A throughout the presentation. And so if you look at the bottom of your screens, you'll find a chat button, but you'll also find the Q&A button. And feel free to post questions there, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we possibly can. So let's roll the first video, please.
The climax of the Torah's story of creation is that the human being is created in the image of God. What does it mean to say that a human being is created in the image of God when God has no image? Based on the Talmud understanding of this, it means to teach us that every human being is born with three fundamental dignities: infinite value, equality, and uniqueness. Infinite value means your life is worth more than any amount of money in the world, that it's worth spending an unlimited amount of money to keep you alive or to save you, that no person should lack for fundamentals of living because of lack of money. And equality means that whatever your gender, whatever your skin color, whatever your religion, you are all equal, and there is no preferred superior image of God. And uniqueness simply means that you are unique. Not even identical twins are identical. There will never be a person like you again. And what you have to say has to be heard and listened to in a distinctive way.
So shortly, you're going to see a poll come up, and this is a tricky one, Rabbi, where we're asking the participants to rank 3 of the qualities that you described in your video. Not an easy task. I think it's fair to say that we all at times, and I know I'm guilty of this, think that perhaps. So I'm going to repeat the question that was on the screen. It says, rank in order of importance to you the 3 dignities that Rabbi Greenberg describes in the video: infinite value, equality, and uniqueness. That's infinite value, equality, and uniqueness. When I think of the equality and uniqueness, I definitely think of, maybe what's happening now in Ukraine, and one person saying that they're better than some other person for some reason. And I see that infinite value has garnered a lot of votes. Rabbi, your thoughts?
Well, let me start by saying, of course, that to me, I appreciate somebody rate one more than the other, but to me, the whole point of Judaism and its revolutionary implications is that we intend to get all 3 for everybody. This is the meaning of Messianism, which I say is the original Jewish word, This is the original Jewish word for tikkun olam. In other words, we intend, that is the Jewish claim, that we intend to repair the world so that literally it will treat everybody as a full human being in the image of God, meaning give all the money needed to save their lives, all the care, or to put another way, the original messianic idea is that we humans are called to improve the world. That means overcome poverty, overcome hunger, overcome oppression, inequalities, sexism, racism, anti-Semitism. We're called to overcome war, beat the swords into plowshares. We are called to overcome sickness and repair the world so that every human being will be treated like an infinitely valuable and equal person. And now, in the meantime, what do you do? Well, that's what the halakha and the Jewish religion law system is about. Since the world is not yet perfect, we don't have enough resources for everybody. And so the truth is that we will not be able to give everybody everything that they need. But in the meantime, Judaism says, in the short run, we'll do the best to divide fairly. There will be probably some inequality at the end, no matter what we do. But the reality is that we keep working at it and we never give up until we get there. In other words, when the world is at its best, we will have the ability to give all three dignities. In the short run, some people may be more than others. In fact, I'll make one other point along these lines, maybe a deeper point. Of the three dignities, infinite value and equality reinforce each other. If I'm infinitely valuable, how can you be more important or more valuable than me? But uniqueness is in tension with the other two. And in fact, uniqueness leads to differences between people. Some people accomplish more, some people make more money, some people learn more, teach more. So the answer is that there's a certain tension there between that dignity and the other two. But again, Judaism's perspective is we try for all three, and we try to work in all three. In the short run, we will have to cut corners or not live up to the fullest dignity, but we keep working on it. In fact, I'll finish with that point. Particularly important for an Orthodox audience. My answer is the Torah started in a world in which there was not full human equality, full human dignity, and case in point, women who were bought and sold in chattels in the time of the Sinai and the giving of the Torah. So the Torah starts in that world, and it doesn't make women fully equal immediately. In fact, it's step by step, and we're now in the 4,000th year, and we're still not there in my judgment. It's an unfinished agenda of Orthodoxy, particularly in this generation, to give women more access to learning, give women access to leadership, to the fullness of their unique and equal dignity. So the answer is the Torah and the Orthodoxy believe in an eternal Torah, which keeps growing and working to improve itself as well as the world.
Thank you, Rabbi. Okay, why don't we roll the second video, please?
The Talmud says that human beings were created by God, and this shows God's greatness, because when a human creates one mold, every coin comes out the same. But from the one mold of image of God, every human being comes out unique. It's a measure of recognizing people as image of God that I recognize their uniqueness. When I lump them all together, and even positively, if I say they're all smart, all Jews are smart, it's a denial of their image of God and their uniqueness. Each person has their own distinctive quality. Rabbi Soloveitchik says that every human being is unique, reflects itself, and that God gives them a unique mission and contribution. Of course, the great challenge is to discover what is mine. As a parent, one of the most important challenges was to discover the uniqueness of each child, to hear their voice, to see their particular response, and to feed it, to honor it, and to develop it. As a teacher, it's so tempting to make a universal statement, but the real challenge is to discover each student's uniqueness, to hear their unique answers, to understand their unique responses, and to make the teaching varied enough to speak to each person's distinctiveness. To come to understand the quality of uniqueness is to understand the divine nature of creation, that God has this amazing capacity, that there are billions of stars, and yet each one God has a name for, each one is different, each one is distinctive. That there are billions of human beings in the world, but each one is distinctive and should be treated in terms of their own unique qualities. That each person should be nurtured and developed so that the unique quality comes out and expresses itself in the world.
So thank you. Wow. We're going to put we're going to open up the chat now, and what we're asking you to do is to please put in the chat a unique quality that people value in others, and then a quality that people don't value in others. So a quality that people value in others, and then another quality that people don't value in others. So I'm seeing gratitude is valued, Rahmanas, kindness, thank you. Understanding, integrity. One that is not valued is self-centeredness. While these are coming through, Rabbi, maybe you could talk a little bit about this self-centeredness. Is there a flip side to self-centeredness?
No, like all good, well, I guess you could say yes, but all good qualities, in fact, all qualities can be used for good or bad. So the good quality is respect for oneself, understanding one's own value, understanding and taking seriously my life and my responsibility for my life. The extension of that idea in a bad way is it becomes totally self-centered. And that's a challenge in almost in every area. Again, you can kill people with kindness. In other words, looking out for them can turn into paternalism, can turn into into I know better than you and I will tell you what to do. In short, so the answer as this is yes, there are negative expressions of uniqueness and there are positive expressions. The challenge to the community is, however, to understand that and to recognize the good quality. Now, what does it mean, the good quality of unique? Well, to start with, it means ending stereotypes. Jews have been victims of this stereotype. Jews are cunning, Jews are crafty, Jews take advantage of people. But again, as I say, even a positive stereotype, it's just one step away. You remember that classic case a few years back? He said, oh, I love Jews. They're all smart and they're all rich, but of course it carried this overtone of the Jews are too rich and too smart. Anyway, my point is, this is a challenge to each one of us. A, not to settle for stereotypes and recognize that's one. And secondly, to recognize that difference is not deviance. Difference is not inferiority. That's in a white society, not to see black as inferior. In a black society, not to see white or not to see women as inferior. In other words, it's a crucial challenge. I give a classic example because, again, we're working on improvement in our time. The attitude to gay people. We now know, with the scientific research has now shown, it has a genetic hormonal basis. It's not simply an arbitrary choice. And number two, we now know that it's on the spectrum of sexuality. It's a minority, a smaller part of the spectrum. Well, in the past, the attitude was that smaller part was seen as deviant, was seen as somehow perverse morally for not doing the right way, and so on. Now we come to understand, and this is one of the great challenges and growth, in my judgment, again, in the tradition. The Torah opposed gay homosexuality when it takes the form of male-male bonding, dominance. It's not relationship, it's power. It takes the form of anti-family, promiscuity, rejection of family, and things like that. And the Greek heroes, they leave their wives and their families and they ignore them. They go off to battle, they hang out, including sexually with their pals and so on. The Torah opposes that. I do too. But the challenge we now have is to recognize the same sex as a genuine religious personal experience and turn into a religious one, meaning we have the gay marriage idea, the idea of commitment to family, commitment to children, commitment to faithfulness. In other words, to live by the values of the Torah in homosexuality. So again, the answer in this challenge is to recognize where the minority is unique rather than deviant. And this is a very bad tendency in all of us. We have to fight to see that which is different from me, not as somehow inferior or wrong, but appreciate the variety of God's creation.
Thank you, Rabbi. I just want to remind everyone to please don't forget to use the Q&A if you have questions for Rabbi Greenberg. If I may ask one quick question before we see the final video. Rabbi, it seems at times in a community that some voices are maybe heard louder than other voices. What does a Torah tradition suggest to help us level that playing field?
That's a fair question too. And I was talking a little idealistically. The real world is sometimes uniqueness express itself. You get a nudge, or you get a unique person who shouts louder than other people and therefore gets unfair or sometimes wrong attention or approval because they make more noise. So that's part of our challenge, an ongoing community. By the way, let me say that as a generality about halakha and Jewish tradition. It's an imperfect world, and therefore we do ration. We do have the struggle to do justice to people's needs. And that starts with the first comment that infinite value and equality is an ideal, but we cannot meet all the needs all the time. And so there is a process in every community. That's what the halakha is about, a process to balance the needs and to make, and even though we can't get perfect equality, to make sure no one falls, beneath the level being taken care of. Now that's one side. The other aspect of an imperfect world is what you just raised the question again, is that in an imperfect world, some people will be more and maybe disproportionately paid attention to than others. And so it becomes a challenge of the leadership and of the community to create an atmosphere where, again, we respect people and we understand speaking up is not wrong, but we put limits, and we're willing to recognize that the greater community needs to balance and must respect all its people and not just give the squeaky wheel should not get all the grease.
Got it. All right, thank you, Rabbi. Let's show the last video, please.
There's an argument in the Talmud between Rabbi Akiva, who says that love your neighbor as yourself is the basic principle of Torah, and Rabbi Ben Azai, who says human being in the image of God is the fundamental principle. I would argue that the two are agreed, because when you love somebody, you discover they're infinitely valuable, equal, and unique. And this is the quality and dignity of an image of God. As I come to love a person, I come to share their needs and their feelings, and I instinctively want to help fill their needs. The dream of Judaism is that we can start with ourselves, our family, widen to our community, eventually our people, and eventually to the whole world. And someday we'll live in a world in which every human being knows that the other is not an other, but like myself, someone that I love and whose life and whose needs I experience as my own. The Torah teaches us that God loves human beings. The very act of creation is an act of love, and this love for God's creatures is expressed in creating a world and in wanting to make that world perfect so that their life will be happy and fulfilled in all its dignity. And why does God love life? Because life is able to respond. And why does God love human beings? Because they have the consciousness and the capacity to love back.
Wow, so impactful. I guess there's a poll question coming up on your screen, and I'll read it. On a scale of 1 to 4, with 1 being extremely easy, 4 being extremely difficult, how easy or difficult is it to truly see people not as the other, but as someone whose needs you experience as your own? While people are answering this poll question, Rabbi, I imagine that everyone might agree with this philosophy, but putting it into practice, that feels like something different, right?
Well, yeah, the answer, of course, is that is the challenge, is to make it work in the real world. And it's, again, I love the Torah for one reason. It's not just a vision, an ideal, perfect world someday. It really gets down into the trenches, starting with the miserable and imperfect world that was true then and in our time with lots of faults, and says, step at a time, take it, have to start by accepting it as it is. Or as we reject, we're seeing now what happens when you have dictatorships, when you have totalitarian systems. The Torah rejects the idea of coercion, even for good purposes. The whole idea of brit, of partnership between God and humans with each other, is that we give up coercion and we try to create an atmosphere which people work together and they come to joint purposes together. Now, that's not love yet, but that's the first start. That's the first step. And then as they get to know each other, as they work, hopefully they grow toward love. Now, again, so the answer is it doesn't happen automatically or easily. It starts, again, if the family does it right, if the parents raise a child lovingly and train them not to be suspicious or angry or closed in against the world, but to widen their capacity for friendship and to love. So it can start in family. Judaism tries to start in family. Then it starts the community. If you can create a community standard, again, it's not easy and it's not automatic, but you can create a tone. This is our goal. Talk through these issues. We'd like to create a community in the image of God. Well, what does that mean? How do we create an inclusive, warm, welcoming environment? How do we train each other not to blow up? It's a wonderful Talmudic statement. It's a mitzvah in the Torah to correct someone, to criticize, to make them better. But if that criticism is not going to make them better, it's just going to hurt their feelings or aggravate them or drive them further down. If you're not an example of what you're talking about, don't say it. So again, you have to create a community where people can criticize lovingly and freely but not dismissively or to knock the other person down. Again, you'll fail many times. Again, the rabbi, Rabbi Adler, who I must say I've known for many years, always struck me as an example of a role model of inclusiveness and reaching out and welcoming people and treating them as someone welcome and warm and loving into my community. And so you have to make up a kind of a conscious plan. This community wants to live by these principles. Therefore you try starting from the leadership as the rabbinic leadership or the lay leadership, and then you deal with the challenges and the difficulties. I'm sure many times you will fail, but that's what Yom Kippur is about. You fail, you correct, you commit your failure, and you try to repent. And part of repentance, very much stressed in the tradition, is to recognize that I hurt people. So with God, you can just say, I apologize, but with people who you hurt, you have to go back and directly speak to them. You have to restore what you hurt them by and what you took from them. And at the same time, have the courage to acknowledge that failure. And if you do that, I believe people respond back. So you can bring out the best in people. That's what I'm saying in a plain way. And that's what communities should set as their goals, to set rules and guidelines to bring out the best in ourselves and in each other. Doesn't always work, but you'd be surprised. It does, and that's a lot of it is in our hands, of course. And that's, again, part of the Torah. It's aspirational. It says, imagine the best possibilities. Imagine what this person is worth. Imagine what this person's dignity is like, and then try to realize it one step at a time.
Rabbi, we're getting some questions in on the Q&A, and I would encourage anyone to use that. One of the questions has to do with equity. And I think in the States in recent years, this concept of equity versus equality has sort of been a big theme. What do Torah values say about equity being an ideal, and does it contradict equality?
So it's a very good issue, and a very important issue too. I don't want to claim the Torah says this. I want to say this is my personal judgment, putting the whole tradition together and trying to assess its many cross currents and cross values. There is a tension between equity and equality, just as there is a tension between equality and uniqueness. In other words, sometimes the truth is that while there's legal equality, there may be inequity or lack of equality in fact. And the obvious case in America is now very visible and very much central part of the national agenda, is that African Americans for 2 centuries have suffered, aside from the fact that in the first 100 years, they were officially unequal. Legally, they were slaves. But even since the end of slavery, there was the inequity of Jim Crow, there was the inequity of all kinds of unfair or pro-white discrimination and so on and so forth. So the answer is equity cannot be totally denied and then say, well, legally we're all equal. You do have a responsibility to achieve equity if you can. That having been said, I disagree with those who are now arguing that the only way we'll get equity is to override equality, over that matter, override legality, and say we have to give not only special investment, but give a blank check, as it were, to those who are trying to establish a new, more dignified and more fairly treated Black community. I think that is a mistake, which in the end undermines the very cause for which it is striving for, which is full equity. So the answer is we have to recognize both. We can't guarantee equal outcomes, but it's a dignity that everybody should be entitled to, and we have to be very sensitive, very analytic to make sure there's no hidden ways in which this inequity is denied because it's official equality, but you don't have access. People have pointed out that Blacks don't have the savings from generation to generation. That's a cumulative disadvantage which leads to inequity or leads to inequality. And so we have to figure out social policies that can overcome some of those background factors. On the other hand, as I say, the key becomes tzedek tirdof, seeking justice and equity justly. If one seeks it unjustly, I think of the Black nationalist Stokely Carmichael, the people who were against Martin Luther King and really who try to turn Black power into a kind of an anti-white racism. That's very destructive, and in the long run, it does not work. So I come back to, I think the Jewish answer is, the goal is equality. One has to become more sophisticated and not self-satisfied, and recognize that some people don't have equity because of hidden or masked or discriminatory processes that deny them the equity, in which case we have to make an extra effort to get those out of the picture and to make up for it. But that tension and that correction takes place not just in America, but all over the world. And I think, again, my answer personally is that in order to get there, to say all whites are guilty, or to say that all whites are racist, or to say that all Jews are privileged whites, it's just not true. And in the long run, it undermines the very moral principles that lead us to work for equality. So that's our challenge again. We're juggling very powerful, conflicting needs, but the challenge is to do just that, to not take their eyes off the goal of equality, and to work in analytic and economic and other ways to achieve equity, and to wrestle with bringing them both together.
Thank you. Rabbi, turning back to the three values, and without getting into too much detail, do you feel that the sources in Yahadut and Judaism for these three values are mostly from the Tanakh, mostly from the Talmud? Where are these sources from?
Okay, I'm going to take that as the double-edged question. The one edge being, I haven't talked about, how about those other sources that are frankly unequal, or that affirm, that Gentiles are other and so on. So I want to admit that this is a reading, not the whole tradition, but a reading of the complete tradition in its best, I think, in its best form. The main source for this reading actually is the Tanakh and Talmud together. Namely, it's the Torah, it's the opening chapter, it's the creation story, which is one of the central teachings of the whole Torah. The creation story is repeated, but the very fact that it's the opening chapter is very clear. It's trying to say, Torah is not just about the Jewish people. If it was, it would start with Abraham in chapter 12, not chapter 1. The Torah is about the whole world, and the Torah's vision is God's vision of the whole world. And in that first chapter, that vision is the Garden of Eden. A Garden of Eden in which, and this is the climax of the whole creation story, the human being is created in the image of God. Now, so number one, we have to take that very seriously as a central core. I mentioned in the past, this is Rabbi Ben Azai's view in the Talmud, that this literally is the great principle of the whole Torah. In other words, all the commandments, all the guidelines, all the ethical and religious commandments are trying to get us to say, recognize, and to practice that the other person, every human being, is an image of God. Now, the second primary source for this teaching is in a Mishnah, Sanhedrin 37a. It's the Talmud's interpretation of this story. It's interesting. It was a case of capital punishment. The rabbis, the witnesses, in effect, were to testify, but the rabbis were against capital punishment. And even the Torah is full of capital punishment. They set up a legal system that made it almost impossible to get to execution. They said once in 7 years or once in 70 years, it had to go before the Sanhedrin, Supreme Court, and if they approved it, they were known as a bloody Sanhedrin. So here's the rabbis who were opposed to it. But before they, on the other hand, they said if a man is a murderer or a woman is a murderer, they have to be held accountable. So, but before the witnesses could testify, the rabbis felt it wasn't enough to take an oath. I promise to tell the truth. Said you can't tell the truth unless you understand first what is the human being whose life is at stake, not just the victim, the murderer. What is their life worth? So you have to understand. You're testifying. This is not a case of we're suing for $1,000. This is a case we're suing for $1 billion, namely. And this is where the Talmud says that the Torah tells us the human being is created in the image of God, the whole creation story. It's a story. It's not a literal tale of how humans came to be. But the Torah tells a story, say the rabbis, for these three dignities. So you'll understand that every human being has infinite value, every human being is equal, every human being is unique. So those are my two primary sources. Now, again, there are thousands of additional sources in this area, again, as I say, I don't deny you can find sources that are full of anger or rejection or hatred. There are, in the course of Jewish history, as the Jews were persecuted, many Jews responded back with, you're another, and with hatred and anger at Gentiles. But this is a challenge now, to take the best. This is the opening theme of the Torah, to take one of the central themes and realize it in the real world. And it's my argument. I have a book that is now being finally edited called The Triumph of Life, in which I argue very strongly that that is the opportunity and the privilege of living in our time. It's a world which has made many progress in many areas, overcoming poverty and hunger and war, things that we've talked about. It's also made very dangerous deviations and destructive exaggerations. So productivity and wealth is turning into global warming and climate crisis. So this is our challenge, to take the good qualities and the achievements and redirect them and channel them. And the Jewish answer is, that's what the Jewish Brit covenant's about. It's about limits. It's about taking all your strength and all your power and shooting for the perfect world and shooting for the highest ideals, but channeling them and doing it within limits. And those limits include respect for the other and not invading them, not destroying them because I want to be on top. Those limits include recognizing that I may be mistaken and therefore there should be a democracy in which people can disagree with me and multiple voices can be heard. And that's the rest of it is, that's the ideal. The rest of it is go, Hillel was once asked in the Talmud, what's the whole Torah? He said, well, the whole Torah is don't do to others, the golden rule. Don't do to others what you don't want to have done to you, or if you will, do to others what you want, namely love your neighbor as yourself. But he says, go now and study the whole rest of the Torah. That's on one foot. The rest of the Torah is the challenge that you're talking about tonight in the videos also. How do you create a community that brings out these qualities? How do you create a process that encourages people to be at their best? And it's an unfinished job, but it's a full-time, worthwhile use of your life.
So on that theme, Rabbi, how do we start the step of building a community that's truly made B'Tzelem Elohim? What are some concrete steps?
Concrete steps. Well, the first concrete step might well be to study the sources, to study together, to decide what is our, or you might say, it's like rewriting a mission statement. The community has to get together and say, this is what we'd like to be like. We'd like to create a synagogue in which everybody feels welcome. We'd like to create a community in which people know other people's needs and try to help them meet those needs. And we'd like to create a community in which people will not be afraid to speak up and express their differences and show their differences in a positive way. So it starts with kind of, as I say, maybe a conscious, it's not too late. Rabbi, I think, had told me he's been there like 27, 28 years. So every 28 years, not a bad idea. But Jefferson once wrote that the Constitution should be rewritten every 50 years. It's the same idea. Go back to basics. Stop and say, this is the purpose and value of the synagogue. These are the top values of the synagogue, and try to lay them out. And again, maybe you can't do it in 1 foot or in one person, but maybe poll. You'll do all kinds of things. Once you lay out those goals, then you ask yourselves, and you work on this together, how do we create a process that leads in that direction? It could be everything from when someone walks in the door, are they greeted and are they welcomed? Is membership open and is membership welcome to people? Do we recognize the fact that it's not all married couples? How do singles feel? How do people people of color, how would they feel if they come into the synagogue? People of different class or educational backgrounds. So you start by laying those out, those kind of things you have, not only in the staff that's in the synagogue, but in the ushers and in the membership. That's the second step. In other words, to lay out actual process, movements, steps that really express and show what you want to do. And again, you can go from there. You can develop chavurot, small groups that meet regularly. I'm working on a book that's just coming out now by Rabbi Israel Salanta, who's a founder of a movement called the Musar movement. He said a very simple thing. He said the Torah is not just about getting us to observe this mitzvah, that mitzvah. The Torah is about making a mensch. The Torah is about getting human beings to develop their good qualities. And he said, therefore, we should spend just as much time as we spend on Talmud or on Tanakh. We have to spend time on working on our character, identifying what are the good characteristics that the Torah wants that will lead us to moral behaviors, identifying what are our bad habits. And again, he said, you can do this as an individual, or you can do this in groups. He developed a whole system, 13 qualities you want to work on. And you did it 4 times a year. In other words, 1 week, you take this quality. I want to be kind. I want to be responsive. I want to be calm and not angry. And you take a whole week, and in that week, you work on that quality. And then you measure it, meaning you keep a diary. And when you fail or when you do it right, write it down. So at the end of a week, you can stop and say, well, look, here I had 3 opportunities to be kind. The first one, I did it right. The second one, I blew it. In other words, this kind of self-awareness and process. So again, that's another part of a community. You can do that not just for personal qualities, but for the community qualities. And you have individual or small groups working on these policies, and then they feed back to each other. So these are some of the steps. Obviously, again, each community is different. It depends on your leadership. It depends on who's there. But I think the answer is that this is in our hands. And again, the first step is to recognize this is our goal, and this is a worthy goal, and that we're going to put some energy into getting there.
You know, Rabbi, we're using Zoom now, and clearly technology has a role to play in all of this. What do you think might be some of the positive ways to employ technology? But also, are there times when we need to be wary of technology in this regard?
Yeah, well, of course, again, it turns out the Messiah is not the Messiah. or people have it for a long time. We're saying, no, technology, that's great. And it's true with major breakthroughs. I mean, people, thanks to technology, the whole Jewish tradition is available, at a click. It's quite astounding. I, or for that matter, any ignoramus can turn into the Bar Ilan has a collection of responsa, all the responsa of Jewish history. So when you think about it, I, or as someone even with a lesser background and lesser training, can click on this thing, and I know more responsa and more answers than Moshe Feinstein or any of the great halachic decisors of the last generation. So the technology has brought many opportunities and blessings, and it has created a multiple expressions and platforms. So people again find they can create, they can explore things that no one ever could do before. That's the great part. But it turns out again, it's not the Messiah, because in the end, it's how you use it. And to me, it's been a little shocking, and I guess shocking is an honest word. The extent to which the rise of all these social media platforms has led to this polarization, hostility, whereas it turns out that white supremacists and neo-Nazis and haters can create common platforms where they reinforce each other. And in general, people are saying that since people have stopped listening to general media, so each one only hears the media that supports their position, and leads to greater exaggeration and greater polarization against the other. So technology can give life, it can give death. The Talmud says about the Torah itself, if you use it in a worthy way, if you are worthy of it, it can be a medicine of life. If you misuse it, if you use it wrongly, if you want to misuse it, it can be a poison. And so the Torah is not guaranteed any more than technology is guaranteed. It gives you a tremendous instrument. The challenge becomes to use that instrument correctly. And again, I say it starts with me personally, you personally, but it goes on to creating community and other systems. That's what the halacha of the Jewish Orthodox tradition is about. It tries to create a set of norms, a set of models, a set of behaviors that will encourage people to do the best rather than the worst, to do more rather than less, to improve the world and improve themselves. Again, I have to admit, there are people who use the halacha in evil or to destroy, to hurt and to harm others. So there's no guarantee in any of this business. It comes back to creating, a process and a community and a partnership that brings out the best in people. And then we have to together protect that, nurture that. And when it comes under attack, fight back. And for that matter, when it comes into polarization, to try to cross those bridges and to recreate them.
I think we have time for one more question. The themes in your videos are really timeless. Was there something going on in either your career or in history, something that was happening where you felt like this was the right time to come out with this type of presentation?
I guess the answer is no. The reason I say that is that the first talk I ever gave, in which I articulated these three dignities of the image of God, was actually a lecture given in 1968. It was printed in 1968. So I can't say that the idea is, now again, I didn't see then what I see now. For example, the obvious, most important example. Then I saw it as the three dignities. It took me another 30 years to realize, but that's what all the commandments and the mitzvot are about. In other words, they're not just that God arbitrarily said, don't steal, don't murder. What the commandment says is that a human being is infinitely valuable, equally unique. You can't murder. That's the ultimate crime, because you're murdering something of infinite value and as unique and never be replaced. So in other words, it took me another decades and decades to see the full implications, to realize that you have to build a whole community or a whole world, maybe by these principles. Admit that. So now what? But I never put out a video all these years. The truth is, what happened is what you talked about. They were all technology. This year, or 2 years ago, the JJ Greenberg Institute, which I founded in part memory for her beloved son who passed away young, but also to try to bring out some of these material, became a division of Hadar Institute. The Hadar Institute has, in fact, we did jointly hired media people of great talent and ability. And they said, look, we'd like to turn this into a video. We think not a video, not a long documentary. These videos are like 90 seconds. I think the longest one is the 2 minutes. But because that's said in our time, that's the only attention you'll get. You got to say it in 90 seconds. And so it was I want to acknowledge their staff and their ability to have finally created. I wish I could have done this 50 years ago. 50 years ago, and many other times, I did it by lecture and by personal contact. And there's a certain quality of the person in lectures, which I think is wonderful and special. Nevertheless, I'm very grateful to those who created into a video. And yes, that one of the goals behind the whole idea is to reach a wider audience. And it's something very important. The Torah is not meant to be, the privilege of a few handful elite. The Torah wants to be, and that to me, it's a model for all of us. It wants to be the Torah of life for everybody. And therefore, it wants to reach out to Amcha, to the people of every type and every background and every educational level and every economic level. And to me, that's what the idea of the platforms, it gives us the opportunity, new platforms, including video, to reach a much wider audience. So I don't mind, first psychologically, I said, get all my ideas down into 90 seconds. Didn't strike me as something I was capable of doing. but they showed me on the contrary that it's a form of respect for people. Don't drag it out. Say it quickly and briefly and in a way that they can understand. And that's also a mitzvah. Again, doesn't mean that one shouldn't write long books or one shouldn't make long speeches sometimes, but each case, they should reflect the respect for your audience and a chance to speak to it at its best, I believe they hear.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Greenberg, for spending time with us. I'm going to hand it over to Morty Labaton from Hadar. You mentioned Hadar, from Hadar.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you so much, Rabbi Greenberg. My name is Morty Labaton. I am Hadar's Director of Programs. We want to just thank everyone who made this program possible. Such a beautiful way to enter Adar, into this season. And I have so much admiration for the greater Hartford community for taking this challenge of creating a community in the image of God, and taking that to heart and doing all you can to create communities of inclusivity and equality and value and uniqueness. I want to especially thank Rabbi Adler. From the moment that you reached out to us, we could just tell that you were a very special person, and the community, or the greater Hartford community, is so lucky to have you. Like Rabbi Greenberg said, that you model these qualities in your own interactions as well. Thank you also to the thank you also to the Beth David Synagogue, to the Jewish Federation of Greater Hartford. And if you're looking for more Torah like this, in addition to all of the learning that you can find in your local community, Hadar is here for you. You can find all of our various learning opportunities at www.hadar.org. We have a special program coming up based around Ta'anit Esther, the Fast of Esther. And I know it's still before Purim, but we're also gearing up for our pre-Passover learning virtual Beit Midrash. So that's going to be coming up as well. Again, www.hadar.org. And I just want to thank all of you for joining us this morning, for giving us your part of your Sunday, and I wish you a wonderful rest of the weekend. Thank you so much. Take care.